This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
This episode is brought to you by Unstoppable. Discover the inspiring true story about Anthony Robles, who defied every expectation to become a national wrestling champion in Unstoppable, a new original movie from Amazon MGM Studios and director William Goldenberg, evoking the excitement and camaraderie of classic sports dramas and thrilling wrestling matches. Unstoppable features an all-star ensemble cast, including Jarrell Jerome, Jennifer Lopez, Don Cheadle, Michael Pena, and Bobby Cannavale. Watch Unstoppable now, exclusively on Amazon Prime Video.
You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your #1 priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. Obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors, but they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. The platform connects you with trusted experts to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. So whether you're closing your first deal or gearing up for growth, Vanta makes compliance easy. Join over 8,000 companies, including Y Combinator and Techstar startups who trust Vanta. For a limited time, get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/simplify. That's VANTA.com/simplify for $1,000 off.
This is the Dragon's Lair in association with the Riverside Sports Bar Newport, an American-style bar with a proper Welsh feel.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon's Lair podcast in association with Riverside Sports Bar, the home of sports fans in Newport. Now, unfortunately, Gavin can't be with us tonight. He's not very well and he's lost his voice, bless him. That's what watching the Dragons does to you. But the show will go on, and I am pleased to have a special guest with me this week. After many years working for BBC Radio Wales as a rugby and cricket commentator, he is now currently freelance and has covered many rugby matches involving the Dragons. Welcome to the pod, Nick Webb. Nick, how are we?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks very much for having me on. What a weekend to come on and make my debut, eh?
Yeah. What a game to talk about, eh?
Yes, moving on.
Oh, dear. Right, so before we go any further, Nick, for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with you, would you just like to tell listeners a little bit about yourself and your background in broadcasting, please?
Yes, I was with the BBC for about 30 years full-time, finished in 2023, but I've been freelancing for them since then. Before that, I was a news and sports journalist with Red Dragon Radio back in the 80s, so I'll go back quite a long time in broadcasting in this part of Wales. Yeah,
I remember Red Dragon Radio. Yeah, I didn't know you worked for them. It's a blast from the past, isn't it?
Yes, I tried to run a sports service on a shoestring there and a few telephones with about a tenth of the budget that the BBC had.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to have to get into it then, Nick. The Dragons in Johannesburg. A very sorry afternoon for the Dragons, it has to be said, as they bow out to the Challenge Cup with a whimper. Lions outscored the Dragons 9-1. It's their heaviest defeat in European history. Well, quite simply, it was men against boys, wasn't it? The other 3 Welsh regions, they've made it through to the last 16, but unfortunately, the Dragons will not be joining them. Now, Nick, you commentated on this game for BBC Radio Wales alongside Richie Rees. Come on then, Nick, let's have your analysis on that Dragons performance in Johannesburg.
Well, how about you can't play rugby without the ball, and the Dragons didn't have much of it in the first half in particular. I mean, realistically, it was one of those afternoons where, as a commentator, you really earn your corn when a side is winning matches, when a Wales side, when Dragons, when any Welsh side is winning. It makes your game, your work so much easier. When the opposition scores 4 tries in 17 minutes in the first half, and the game is gone by the half-hour mark, then you really earn your corn. But that first half was so disappointing. The lack of possession, the struggles in the scrum, the failure to adapt the rather pernickety ref in the line out, who was calling things off straight when it was a couple of centimetres off centre. And really, that was a very, very depressing first half. Second half, a little bit better, but still conceded a further 5 tries. There was a bit of fight in there, and let's just hope that the youngsters involved in that squad, because it was a very young backline in particular. I mean, Rio Dyer at 25 was the oldest starter in the backline, and Elliot Dee was the only guy 30 years of age in the whole squad. So let's hope that they made of tough stuff, those Dragons youngsters, and they learned some lessons for it. And let's hope that the Dragons board learns some lessons in terms of recruitment for next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Well summarised, Nick. I mean, to be fair, we should remember the Dragons are playing 3 games in 14 days. They had a short turnaround, 6 days, wasn't it, to South Africa, 28 degrees heat apparently out there. Do you think that excuses the performance?
Not really. I mean, you'd expect to be on the back foot. There are difficulties in selection, and Wainwright went out to South Africa with the Dragons squad, but wasn't able to play because of a minor injury. Well, we hope it's a minor injury for Wales's sake. And yes, the schedule is ridiculous, frankly. I'm not a huge fan of having South African sides in this competition, but you have to say they were overwhelmingly the better side. Having lost their 2 away games, they demolished Poe at home, got 5 points out of that, and there was never any doubt that the Lions would get 5 points out of the Dragons. But you look at the contrast between the way Packs play, roaming the high veld, the big guys up front for the Lions, and you looked at some of the people involved in the passing movements in that first half, and quite a lot we were naming, the numbers 2, 3, and 4 in the Lions side, the front 5 forwards who were rampaging round. You just wish, well, we had guys like that who can not only be huge in the scrum, massively powerful scrum, but run and pass with freedom as well. And it's a long-term project for the Welsh game, I think, to try and develop athletes like that who can combine power and pace. And you look at the tight head prop, Antley Bacania, the guy who looks like Martin Madden blown up a bit.
Yes, he's huge, isn't he? He is a big guy. Yeah.
He's huge, 153 kilos, but he can still canter around the park and deliver nice little offloads. And you feel it's a sort of 10-year project from mid-teens for Welsh sides in general to develop guys who can, run, pass and scrimmage at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. So last week on the pod, me and Gavin struggled to take any positives in the defeat to Poe, which is a game that you also commentated on, Nick, wasn't it? You commentated on that home defeat to Poe.
I was there, certainly, yes, witnessing firsthand. Again, it is a difficulty to get many positives out of it. Hopefully they will have gained from the experience and learned what is necessary. I quite like the service of Morgan Lloyd in the second half when he came on, had a little bit of ball, but there's some. Hugh Anderson did reasonably well at the back, but there was so little to play with going forward, wasn't there? And the forwards were pretty well annihilated. I mean, I like Ryan Woodman as a player. I think he's got a big future, and Tane Basham always worked so hard and stood out even in a losing cause. I just hope the Dragons manage to hang on to him for next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're facing a fight to keep him, which is understandable because he is a quality player, isn't he? Philo talked a lot yesterday after the game about learnings. He said, it's a young squad. He's really pushing this narrative now that the Dragons are a young squad. But Nick, do you think there's an argument to say that young players could be damaged by being in a team that's losing almost every week? Like we talk about learners, but there is a negative side effect to this, isn't there? It must damage their confidence. Do you think?
It must be difficult, yes, for young players to hold their heads up high and give it their best. As you say, when they are losing week in, week out. And I think the best squads have a core of experience. If you look back at the Welsh sides that have been successful mostly in the noughties, Ospreys, when they got into the last 8 of Europe, had a hard core of experienced New Zealand internationals to work around for the younger players to come through. Cardiff, when they've won the Challenge Cup on a couple of occasions, both of them, they had half a dozen foreign players who are really consistent week in, week out. And if you look at the Dragons recruitment, well, unfortunately, they haven't quite got the best out of them this season, have they? Some of their new recruits, Cummins in the second row has only played a couple of games. Funaki, the Tongan in the back row, played for Pontypool last weekend. So let's hope we see him on the park for the Dragons fairly soon. Harry Wilson hasn't really made an impression in the centre. So the only guys among the foreign contingent, if you like, have been those trying their best to hold up the front row. We've had a plethora of foreign props in there. I think they need better quality overseas recruits to play around. And it's great to see all these local youngsters in their early 20s wearing the Dragons shirt, but I think too much is being asked of them at the moment.
It's a very good point, especially around recruitment. It's been widely acknowledged now at the Dragons and the supporters that the recruitment just hasn't been good enough. And I think only Shane Lewis-Hughes really has been the best player out of the players that we recruited. Even David Buttress, the co-owner of the Dragons, said on social media that he wasn't happy with the recruitment done in the summer. So when a co-owner comes out and says that, bearing in mind he probably would have had to sign off on these sign-ins. So when a co-owner comes out and says, yeah, we didn't recruit very well, it's not a good sign, Nick, is it?
It isn't. I mean, you're always, rugby's a brutal game these days, and you can be unlucky with injuries, and a couple of those guys have been. But I think it's a worry for Welsh rugby as a whole in the last couple of years that they haven't been able to recruit overseas players of good enough quality. Plus, of course, the player drain away from Wales with the slashed budgets in the last couple of years, and you get to a point where you have to speculate to accumulate. And how the Welsh Rugby Union has expected our 4 professional sides to continue to function and have any chance whatsoever of being competitive with the budgets that they've been on for the last couple of seasons. Heaven only knows. A lot of problems related with COVID, and WRU shoves the debt problems onto the regions effectively there as well. But and a lot of players leaving Wales as a consequence. So you get what you pay for at the moment, I'm afraid. And Welsh Rugby hasn't been able to finance strong enough squads for its 4 pro sides.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Nick. I think from a Dragons point of view, though, if you put aside the salary cap, the Dragons always had the lowest budget out of the Welsh regions. Now we're all on the same budget. There's very little excuse now for the Dragons, because it was hoped that once the budgets were, everyone was on the same budgets, that the gap would be narrowed and Dragons would keep up with the other 3. It still hasn't happened. We're all operating on the same budget, and the Dragons appear, if anything, to be getting worse. And that's a concern, isn't it? I mean, put aside the salary cap, you can say, well, yes, we've got the lowest budget, but when everyone's operating on the same budget and Dragons are still way behind the rest, that's the real concern, I think.
Yeah, there's still room to bring more money into the club, maybe, and maybe we ought to look at more money being brought in via the use of Rodney Parade. And you look at ticket prices. I mean, I've got relatives in London, you look at Harlequins and they're charging 70, 80 quid a ticket these days.
Yeah.
Bath, similarly, just over the border where I went to college. I mean, I like visiting Bath and occasionally you think of taking a match there. And you're paying 70, 80 quid for what's essentially a seat in an open stand out in the elements. Welsh rugby is, I'm afraid, it's a little bit bargain basement at the moment. It is relatively cheap to attend matches, but the product is not maybe good enough to get people coming back.
Yeah. And people give a lot of stick to Dragons for attendances because we do have the lowest attendances out of the 4 regions. But I always say to people, because we average 5K, that's what we averaged last season, tends to be around 4.5, 5K. I think it's still pretty good to get 5K when you're a team that loses almost every single week. I think that's good going. I do, to be honest. It's not great, but for a team that loses, like I said, almost every single week, I think it's remarkable the Dragons still average 5K at their games.
Yeah, it is decent enough, isn't it? And there's always a good spirit in the crowd. And I've dragged my wife, who's Cardiff woman, over a couple of times, and even she's enjoyed the experience despite some of the results on the field. So yeah, credit to those who do keep turning up faithfully. And yeah, I mean, Welsh rugby does have to earn the right to have those spectators turning up. I mean, if you look at back in 30 years ago, Newport, mid-90s, lost to Caerphilly 5 times in one season, crowds down to 1,500. Tony Brown comes along, and all of a sudden you're getting packed houses for what was effectively a second string against Uruguay. I seem to remember in the late 90s. So. Yeah, build it and they will come, I think. But how to build it is the $64 million question at the moment.
Yeah, I think it needs serious investment, Nick, from the owners now. I think that's the only way to sort of break this cycle of failure at the Dragons. I think the squad needs a complete overhaul. It just seems to me that there's just too many players who, and I will never fault the effort. And me and Gav stressed this. I am not going to criticise the effort of players. Nobody goes out on the field to lose games. But the reality is, Nick, I don't know if you agree with this, a lot of those players in the Dragon squad currently, they're just not good enough. We got talented youngsters, we got a handful of internationals, but the marzipan layer of the squad, as I like to call it, it's just not there, is it, Nick? Do you think? Or am I being harsh?
No. I mean, without criticising individuals, the quality, as you say, isn't there, and you can't blame those guys. They're doing their best. They're earning a living. It's a brutal and difficult game, and there's not much stability in it, is there, for a profession where you're living in most cases 1 or 2 years ahead. So not knocking any individuals at all, but you're right, the quality isn't there, and there are too many players whom, if you were being unkind, you'd describe as journeymen, I guess. But as I say, I'm not criticising individuals at all.
No, we try not to do that on this pod, but we kind of know who the players are up to it and those who are not. But like I said, they go out on the field and they do try their best. But it's tough, isn't it? It's a very tough league. It's a very tough league to compete in.
It is. You look at the fixture list to come, and there's Munster next weekend, who will be powerful despite their Ireland absences. A couple of games in February that, if the Dragons can get a reasonably fit squad to choose from, Glasgow usually pretty severely depleted, Glasgow at home mid-month, and then the trip out to play Zebre, who might, you don't know how it's going to go with Zebre, because there are going to be changes to that setup next season. We don't know whether we'll see the team and the same guys, so they might have fallen apart by then, or they might be willing to give the supporters in Parma something to remember them by. But there's a couple of winnable games coming up in February, if we want to bring a little bit of hope to proceedings.
Yeah, although I will remind you, the Dragons have not won in Parma since 2019. which some people might be surprised by, others might not be. But the Dragons do not have a good record against Zebra out in Palmer.
No, it's not going to be a gimme by any means, but I think it is a winnable fixture, one that they ought to try and target for an away success.
No, completely agree. Going back to the game on Saturday, the stats, Nick, that came out of this game. I don't know if you've seen any stats. You probably would have done if you're commentating on the game. They're pretty brutal, and it makes for damning reading. So, just a 65% tackle success. 65%. That is so incredibly low. 31 tackles missed. 67% scrum success, which I actually thought was higher. To be honest, I was surprised it was that high because I don't know about you, Nick. You've watched far more rugby than I have. I have never seen a scrum get absolutely obliterated in the way that Dragon scrum did in Johannesburg. It was totally destroyed, wasn't it? That scrum.
Yeah, that's what you're liable to get against South African sides. Even looking down at that Lions lineup, they only had like a handful of players with 1 or 2 caps each. There are no big names there, but they simply have a greater number of big men, powerful men to choose from, so that they can choose the big, powerful men who are good athletes as well. In Wales, we have a relatively small stock, I think, of powerful guys who are actually, handling athletes as well, which is obviously something that has to be worked on from a very young age if we're to develop those for the future.
No, quite right. And as soon as I saw that Dragons front five on the team sheet on Friday, I knew we were going to struggle. But my goodness, I think those props might need therapy after that in South Africa. They were going backwards to the rate of knots. It got absolutely destroyed, the scrum. I felt sorry for guys like Martinez and Coleman and Dylan Keller-Griffiths, and it's tough, isn't it? It's so tough. Although Latu did score it was a good finish, actually. I thought over the top like that was it's something, I suppose.
Absolutely, but he is an international player, obviously, and he's playing a decent part in the Dragons squad. But if you think of the attributes of professional rugby, you think of props. Martinez has got 3 Argentinian caps, fair enough, but you want to be recruiting your props from Argentina and South Africa, and it doesn't happen, but France, really, countries that churn out big powerful guys by the dozen, and Tonga, a great rugby nation, but not known for in particular for its props, is it?
No, it's not. It's a fair point. One of the areas that really struck me that badly failed was the line-out. Elliot D, who's so reliable with his arrows, one of the most reliable line-out throwers, he got pinged 3 times for not throwing the ball straight. Now, you said on commentary that you felt he was hard done by. I mean, there was a couple I thought was a bit contentious, but it was just a shock to see that, wasn't it? Because Elliot is so reliable with his throwing in, but it just faltered the line-out. 76% line-out success.
To be fair, on another day with another referee, he might have got away with all those, because none of them you thought immediately, that's going to be pinged. But it was a French ref, Mr. Arizmendi, in his first European match. And he obviously wanted to show whoever was assessing them that he knew all the law book. And to be fair, he did pull up one of the Lions hookers for the same offence. But that wasn't great. And combined with the scrum being in reverse throughout the first half in particular, the Dragons didn't get into the Lions 22 with the ball in that first half, which is pretty unusual, really.
Yeah, not a single entry in the 22 in the first half. Well, they didn't have the ball, did they? And when they did have the ball, they coughed it up or they got turned over. So just very difficult.
Last couple of weeks, they've possibly been a little bit too ambitious about where they're playing the rugby. I mean, it sounds ridiculous because as a spectator, and these days a paying spectator for quite a lot of games, you want to see entertaining rugby and adventure. But I think the Dragons the last couple of weeks have been trying to play too much rugby around the halfway line.
Yes.
And under a little bit of pressure, you make a handling mistake, the opposition have a scrum, and then you're back on the defensive. But it's a very fine balance, and I wouldn't fancy Phil O'Tia's job at the moment.
No, spot on, Nick. We do try and play far too much rugby. Something that me and Gav have spoken about. Our attack is really toothless as well. It's a big problem. It really is. I did have to laugh because I watched the game on TV, on EPCR TV, but they took the South African SuperSport feed, and there was one moment in the match. I actually spat out my tea because it was quite ironic. We got turned over in attack in the 74th minute, and bear in mind the score was 53-10. And there was two commentators. It was a man commentator, it was a female commentator on SuperSport. And when we got turned over, like I said, it was 53-10, got absolute hammered. And the female commentator said, "Yeah, it's just not going the Dragons' way today," which I thought was the understatement of the century. One of the worst performances I've ever seen. And she just went, "Yeah, it's just not going the Dragons' way today." Oh dear, that just summed it up for me, that really did. Yeah, it was a tough day. Like I said, men against boys, and Dragons do exit the Challenge Cup with a whimper, unfortunately. Very disappointing, but probably, we expected it, Nick, didn't we? Given, I know there was a narrative about, can the Dragons go out there and, winner takes all shootout? Can we have 4 Welsh regions in the last 16? But it was always highly unlikely the Dragons to win this game. But you still would have expected a better performance than that, wouldn't you?
I think, in retrospect, where qualification was lost was in the second half against Montpellier in the first game, where they had plenty of attacking chances, lost by 4 points, and that a victory in that game could have led to a different scenario for the group. I mean, they weren't outplayed by Poe by any means. I thought Poe were a fairly workaday side coming to Rodney Parade as well. So realistically, the work had to be done in the first 3 games rather than the final round in Johannesburg. But congratulations to the other Welsh sides for getting through, with the Ospreys hosting the Scarlets in a Wales match in early April, possibly in Bridgend, possibly in Swansea on the Sunday, and Cardiff somehow snuck through on the back of just one win as well. So I suppose congratulations to them as well.
I don't fancy their chances out in Connacht, though. I think Connacht the dark horses for the Challenge Cup, because they got a run of home games as well in this tournament, if they keep winning. So they're going to be hard to stop.
Yeah, they've done well, haven't they? Connacht in recent years. I mean, Pat Lam made quite an impression out there, didn't he? And really, for a side that was written off as the weaklings of Irish rugby, and at one point they too were the subject of reviews. Should they carry on as a professional outfit and so on? But the Dragons aren't helping themselves with the narrative at the moment.
No, they're not.
Although you have to take it into consideration. People say, well, split the money among 2 or 3 sides. What those suggestions don't take into account is that you get a lot of your money for appearing on television. And if you only have 3 Welsh sides, you have a lot fewer games to offer to television. So you bring down the total input straight away. You have a lot fewer derbies because you can't have 2 lots of derbies on one day, a judgment day type thing. And there'll be a narrowing of the financial base, the player base, and so on. So although these are tough times at the moment, I think Welsh rugby should stick with 4 sides, 4 professional sides, despite the somewhat ill-informed comments that surround the debate and in some places.
Yeah, good point, Nick. Good point. So if we look back on the first block of the season for the Dragons, yes, it was disappointing, but it was also encouraging in many ways. You know, they won against the Ospreys. Yes, it was a smash and grab. We were lucky, we know that. But nonetheless, it was a winning start. We did okay out in Leinster. That was a credible performance, I thought, considering the budgets and, you know, the resources. But then those two disappointing defeats to Sharks and Lions, two winnable games that should have been won, and then a wretched performance out in Connacht. And then Dave Flanagan lost his job, which we were disappointed about on the pod. What were your thoughts, Nick, when Dave Flanagan lost his job? Was you surprised that the Dragons parted company at that particular time?
Yeah, I was a bit. Obviously, Dave Flanagan still had a lot to do to get another contract at this stage, and the talk was that he wanted to try and assure his future, and maybe he wasn't able to try and get the assurances that he wanted. But a little bit surprised about the timing. It is pretty early in the season to change coaches in the rugby world. It usually takes until after Christmas, and I'm not sure though with the quality of the squad at the moment, the results would have been much different had he stayed on until this point. But you'd expect, in most circumstances, professional boards to be making a decision for next season around about now, rather than when they did. When was it? Back at the end of October.
Yeah. So Philo Tiatia is the current head coach, interim head coach. There's going to be a decision made by the board after the Munster game. How do you see it going, Nick? Does Philo Tiatia strike you as the head coach the Dragons need? Do you think they'll keep him, or do you think they should look for a proven quality, experienced head coach?
I've got a lot of respect for him as a rugby man, and he does have coaching experience in several countries. Whether he actually wants to be head coach from his demeanour and the tone of what he says is another question. It's a very difficult call for the board at the moment, because who else are they're going to attract in terms of quality? And Dave Flanagan was seen as a very promising young Welsh coach. You know, the Ospreys. The Ospreys have snapped up Mark Jones, who got the boot from the Scarlets, but you know, gone globe-trotting and got experience around the world. You'd have to pay big and to attract someone to take on a challenge the size of the Dragons at the moment, with a track record, with a reputation.
Exactly, just the reputation that makes it hard to attract good quality coaches. You know, people say our recruitment needs to be better. We need to sign Jared Evans and all these other guys. But it's like, how do you attract quality players and coaches to a club like the Dragons with a reputation? It's difficult, Nick, isn't it? You know, but the only way to do it, I think, is to spend big. They're going to have to, I think. It's the only way I can see the Dragons turning it around.
You've got to get into a virtuous circle rather than a vicious cycle, haven't you? And talking about players, the Jared Evans sort of level of players, there's a little bit surprised when Sam Davis wasn't worked harder on to stay at Rodney, because he was a guy who could direct a game. He's obviously of decent quality. He's been playing some good rugby for Grenoble in the French second division. I mean, maybe fancied a bit of life abroad, and who can blame him? But you know, I think they ought to have worked a bit harder to keep him at the time.
No, I agree. He was always a Marmite player, Sam Davis, with the Dragons fan base. Some fans liked him, a lot of fans didn't, but I always liked him. I thought he was a very good controlling 10, and I was disappointed when he left. It's interesting you mentioned Tiatia there, his demeanour. Now, me and Gav had spoken about this on the pod. I've seen a few supporters talk about it as well. Does he give off reluctant head coach vibes to you, Nick? Because to me, just strikes someone who didn't ask to be in this position and doesn't particularly want to be head coach. Do you get that impression as well?
It could be just a Kiwi thing. I mean, you know, he's been fine, you know, polite and engaged when on the relatively few times that I've interviewed him, so can't complain about that as a journalist. But a little bit withdrawn in terms of banging the drum and flying the flag and getting messages over maybe to the paying public. I've no idea what he's like behind closed doors, and as I said, he's a rugby man with a fine reputation, but you do wonder whether he actually wants to be the face of Gwent rugby on an ongoing basis.
Well, we'll see how it plays out pretty soon. Let's park the Dragons to one side. Let's talk about Wales, because the Six Nations squad was announced. The Six Nations time is my favourite time of the year. I love Six Nations. So Wales squad was announced. 3 Dragons called up: Elliot Dee, Aaron Wainwright and Roger Williams. There's no place for Rio Dyer, Tane Basham or Brodie Coughlin. 2 uncapped players are selected amongst the 19 forwards and 15 backs. Ospreys fly half Dan Edwards and Scarlets wing Ellis Mee, both fine players. Nick, you've had time to stew and reflect on this squad. It's caused a fair bit of debate on Welsh Rugby Twitter, or X as it's now known. What did you make of that squad when it was released in the week?
The forwards were more or less what I expected. A couple maybe of alterations in the front row I would have made. Back 5 of the pack, more or less as expected. The backs, I've no idea what happened there. There are some bizarre omissions. I think Rio Dyer's unlucky. I think he's paid the price for Dragons' lack of form, because he never gets the ball in any time and space.
We've been saying that so many weeks on this pod. Thanks for saying that, Nick. Because sometimes I think, is it just us that thinks this? But I'm so glad you mentioned that. He just doesn't get the ball. And when he does get the ball, he's got no space and he runs into traffic. Our attacking system just don't do anything for him, does it?
It's the equivalent of Welsh rugby about 15 years ago when Plan B was give it to Shane,
Yes.
Plan A didn't operate very often. And, Rio Dyer is a fine player. He's not in the same class as Shane Williams, but it's the same point that he gets used as a default option. Like many observers, absolutely baffled by the absence of Max Llewellyn, the leading try scorer in England. And you would have thought a player who would have suited the Gatland preferred mould of previous successful eras of big, fast, powerful 3/4. So Llewellyn, I'm surprised at his omission. At fullback, Cam Winnett, I think was very successful last year, making a name for Wales. Gatland talks about developing squads for the future, but he's got one specialist fullback in Liam Williams, who's 33, 34 and somewhat injury prone in the last couple of years. So why Winnett isn't there, I've no idea. Why Llewellyn isn't there, I've no idea. And Gareth Anscombe, all right, he has been injury prone, but you would have thought that with 1.5 specialist fly halves named in the squad, then Gareth Anscombe ought to be in there, even if it's just to provide a bit of off the field training squads guidance. I like Ben Thomas as a player, but obviously Cardiff don't particularly want to use him as a fly half, albeit he played there against Connacht last Friday night. Yeah. And Dan Edwards, I think, is a very promising young fly half, and I'd be keen to see him given a fair crack in the Six Nations. But there are a fair few omissions. Scrum half, I think Reuben Morgan-Williams is a bit unlucky as well, particularly that he could be partnered with Dan Edwards, the Ospreys partnership at the moment. So, yes, I'm a bit baffled by the back line. And, I hope that likes of Ellis Mee comes through, but he's been picked on the basis of very, very little top-level professional game action. And I think Warren Gatland, one of his strengths in his first period used to be as a selector, but I'm not sure that he's got that anymore.
No, when we look at the Wales squad, the debate is always around who isn't in the squad rather than who actually is in the squad. And like you said, the omissions are pretty notable. Cam Winnett, as you mentioned, no Johnny Williams. Max Llewellyn is baffling. Gatland did use what I thought was a flimsy excuse, but he didn't get any touches, against South Africa. It's like, well, you didn't give him the ball. He can't do anything. He hasn't got the ball. And we did kick a lot against South Africa that day. Gareth Anscombe, as you said, I love Dan Edwards. I think he's a very fine young fly half, but I am worried that there's a lack of experience at 10. I think Anscombe needed to be there just as a mentor for him, a guiding hand, but he's not there. Ruben Morgan-Williams, as you mentioned, really good young scrum half. Corey Domachowski, he seems to have fallen off the radar for Wales, doesn't he? That's a strange one. Dylan Lewis.
I'd have Domachowski in alongside Gareth Thomas and Nicky Smith. And I think Dylan Lewis would probably be a decent pick in the front row, given that Will Griff-John has made one start for Sale in a throwaway match this season. So that's a bit unusual. I hope he comes through and proves us wrong. But going to this Six Nations, obviously hoping for the best as Welsh supporters, and I don't get free seats anymore on the commentary box. I've paid out for a couple of matches, so let's hope we're wrong, but I'm not sure that this is making the most of what we've got available for Wales this season.
No, and there's just so many notable omissions as well. So just to continue, Rhys Davis, James Fender, these are really big guys, big presence for the Ospreys now included. Tame Pumphrey, who I do like, and was a favourite in the Gatland, but he just gives away too many daft penalties. Now that's the problem I have with Tame Pumphrey, just too many thick penalties. And then Jared Evans, who has been playing very well at Harlequins and is eligible for Wales. Yeah, because there's some confusion over this 25 cap. There's just too many caveats and loopholes, Nick, this 25 cap rule, isn't it?
It's looking a bit tatty at the moment, but I think it has to remain the 25 cap rule. Otherwise, Welsh professional club rugby is going to go down the chute even more quickly than its current decline. People say, "Oh, it's hindering Warren Gatland's selection." It's really not. Rhys Carey went to Saracens because he wasn't getting picked for Wales from Cardiff. So obviously he can earn a few more bob elsewhere if he's not going to be playing for Wales. Joe Hawkins, very useful young player, handful of caps, and he hasn't really had a look in as Exeter this season. So the 25 cap rule, despite what a lot of social media commentators seem to say, hasn't really affected Welsh selection that much at the moment.
No, completely agree. Warren Gatland was asked by Gareth Rhys-Owen on the Scrum 5 podcast if Wales can win the Six Nations. And he said yes. If Wales win, they're opening 2 games away in France and Italy. Nick, do you share Gatland's enthusiasm? Can Wales win the Six Nations, or is it pie in the sky?
He's got to say that. He's got to say it, whether he believes it or not.
It felt like a hospital pass by Gareth Rhys-Owen a little bit, that question, because if he says no, people are going to say, well, he's being negative. And if he says yes, people think he's living in cloud cuckoo land, isn't it? So
yeah, I mean, Gareth Rhys-Owen's doing his job to ask the question. And,
of course, yeah.
He's got to say that in response, whether he believes it or not. I mean, if you ask the Italian management if they're going to win it, they can say, yes, we can. Well, yes, it's possible, but extremely unlikely. And you fear that Wales's trip to Italy might decide bottom place rather than top.
I completely agree. That game against Italy is key, isn't it, Nick? I think that's going to decide Wales's fate. So what constitutes a successful tournament for Wales, do you think, in this year's Six Nations? Because if Gatland wins just one game, say against Italy, is that enough to keep him in his job? Because bear in mind, last season we won the wooden spoon. So you could argue, well, it's an improvement. Might not be much of an improvement, but it's still an improvement. What do you think constitutes a successful tournament for Wales in this Six Nations?
I don't think one win ought to be enough for Warren Gatland to remain in place. 2 wins as a supporter I'd take, but again, that's probably borderline, depending on the performances in the other matches as well. 3 wins at the moment, I'd bite your hand off for.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely would be a success, I think, if we had 3 wins. So,
if Wales get 3 wins out of this tournament with the squad that they've got, then I shall eat humble pie and go and worship at Gatland's Gate once more.
So 2 more questions then before we move on. I'd like to know where you think Wales will finish in the Six Nations.
I fear 5th out of the 6. I think they probably will scrape a win against Italy, but I would not expect success in any of the other matches. Hope I'm wrong.
So you're saying 5th then?
Yeah,
5th of the table. I agree with you. I think 5th as well. And then finally, who will win the 2025 Six Nations?
I think like last few years, France and Ireland battling it out, and with France having Dupont and Tamac potentially back together at half back, it really is a pretty lethal combination to steer the ship. So Ireland under Simon Easterby, great rugby guy, but he's picked a bit of a standstill squad, dependent on quite a few old faces. They're still looking for a successor to Johnny Sexton. They've got quite a few contenders, but need someone to really put their stamp on that shirt. So I'd still go for France at the moment.
And I see the Scotland, the dark horses discourse is doing the rounds on social media. Do you buy into that, Nick?
Scotland have gone forward under Townsend, haven't they? They're a bit more consistent than they were, but I don't think they're consistent enough to win the title as yet. It seems to have been a routine to talk them up over the last few years, and they always blow up somewhere along the way. But I still think they'll be the difficult opponents for Wales in round 4 up in Murrayfield. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, then. So just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and leave us a kind review on Apple Podcasts. We will always give a shout out to our listeners who leave us a good review. And we are also available on the Wrap YouTube channel. So make sure you like and subscribe. Okay, so back to the Dragons then. It doesn't get any easier, Nick, does it? It's Munster up next on Saturday night, kickoff 7:35 p.m. The game is live on S4C and Premier Sports. So look, remember then the Dragons will be without their Wales trio of Aaron Wainwright, Elliot Dee and Roger Williams. Although, as you mentioned earlier, Nick, Solomon Funaki came off the bench and scored in the 78th minute for Pontypool against Llandovery on the weekend. So that's some good news. But, given the short turnaround and the lack of form and confidence of this Dragons team, it's going to be very hard, isn't it, Nick, for them to pick themselves up off the floor and go again against a very tough team, even if this isn't a vintage Munster team.
Yeah, Munster have been very consistent in comparison with Welsh sides, certainly over the last couple of decades. They usually have decent strength in depth. They usually come with 1 or 2 grizzled overseas internationals to strengthen them when their Irish internationals are away. Beaten by Northampton Saints last weekend in Europe, but put up a good performance there. Beat Saracens a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah, it's a bit of a cliche, but whoever Munster or Leinster bring over, they're always powerful, aren't they? So it would be a good match to win. Be interesting to see whether Funaki is back in action. I see Jordan Williams also had a run out for Pontypool as well. It'd be nice to see him back in the mix, and hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 more experienced figures. I mean, Angus O'Brien's been going pretty well, but obviously missed the trip to South Africa because of a thumb injury. Hopefully that's not too bad. So good luck to whoever takes the field in Dragons colours next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one more thing on the Dragons, Nick. Do you feel, honestly, that this could be turned around? The Dragons, do you feel like they can become a competitive outfit? Because there is a lot of doom and gloom and skepticism now amongst the fan base, and as you mentioned, commentators on social media. Because we have a fantastic rugby region. Gwent is a hotbed of rugby, so many great clubs, but it's a shame, isn't it? The pro team is just failing as it is. Can we be turned around? Have we got reasons to be cheerful?
Well, if you look at, as I mentioned, Newport in the mid-90s were languishing, down in the second division when we had a 9 or 10 team first division, and Newport weren't in action then in the top flight then, and in the investment in the form of Tony Brown did Newport proud, and that played into the first few years of the Dragons as well. So yes, I think things can be turned around with investment. There've been lots of cases of clubs being turned around. I mean, if you look at in France, over in Vannes, have come up from nowhere to be a top 14 side and excite the Bretons over there. Yeah. Things can be turned around, but I think given the reputation of the side being as a low ebb at the moment, that means you have to work so much harder to, and maybe in some cases pay more to get the experienced guys in, whether it be on the playing or the coaching side, and really you have to at some point try and get things in perspective. At least people have got a side to support. When you look at the English sides that have gone bust over the last couple of years, the likes of Worcester and Wasps and London Irish and Jersey. So at least there's still a side there to support. And you have to remember, at the end of the day, it is sport. And thankfully, as journalists or as rugby players, it's not a matter of life and death. And like those in the medical profession, we don't bury our mistakes.
No, it is a matter of life and death for some supporters, though, the way they talk about rugby, isn't it? But yeah, good stuff, Nick. Well, look, let's end this podcast on a positive. Well, two positives, actually. So 2 Dragons teams, the one on the weekend. So firstly, well done to the Dragons under-18s who beat RGC 40 points to 12 at Real RFC on Sunday afternoon. Great work, boys. And then the Dragons All-Stars, and this is impressive, they beat Llanelli Warriors 17-10 in Ebervale on Sunday, making it 16 wins on the bounce. Now, there's a Dragons team that knows how to win, Nick. That's all I'm saying. They know how to win the All-Stars. They are going incredibly well. 16 wins on the bounce. That's some positivity to end on, isn't it?
Well done. Congratulations to both those sides. And yeah, we have to remember that there's an awful lot of rugby players in Gwent, and we need to be hoping that they can be funneled towards the top levels. And well done to the community department as well for running the All-Stars side so successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. What I will say about the Dragons, excellent community team, really good work off the field. I mean, this community team did win a URC award for their work, but there's a disconnect between what has happened off the field to what's happening on the field, and that's the problem. We just need them to connect, don't we? You know, it's all very well talking about the off-field stuff, and apparently we're on course to make a profit, according to the CEO, Rhys Blumberg. I don't know if you saw those comments, but we just need to see some results now, Nick, don't we? Because that's what we as supporters want.
That's it. A bit of investment for next season. Speculate to accumulate, and let's hope that the some sort of budgets have been signed off at WRU level for next season. I'm told that those have been agreed, but they haven't been agreed with the four professional sides. So there's a bit of work to be done there. But yeah, Welsh rugby needs to have lots of healthy professional sides. The men's national team, the 4 pro sides, the women's sides as well in future, and hopefully we'll see a widespread professional women's side in 10 years' time, that people can go along and watch the Dragons women and men play on alternate weekends. Maybe if you're talking about making places viable as professional setups, you need to look into the medium to long term and get the women's teams providing being a bonus to the finances rather than something that has to be subsidised, to get going, as is at the moment. But that's another pod for you, I guess. That, because of course at the moment we've got or nearly most of the Welsh women at top level playing for English club sides. Why aren't there 4 professional women's sides in the same way as there are 4 professional men's sides? There we are. Come back to that one in a decade's time if you're still there.
They certainly will. Okay, that'll do for this week. So, Nick, where can people find you on social media if they want to follow you?
Yeah, I'm on X still, Nick Webb 2017, and it's the same on Blue Sky as well, Nick Webb 2017, and I'll be hopefully. I mean, I'm no fan of the owner of X. Obviously,
No.
people are, but I'm still on there. I'm hoping more Trump people transition to Blue Sky as well. And if you want to listen to me on the way to Rodney Parade next weekend, then I'm down at the Arms Park. Not sure.
Are you doing Cardiff Sharks game here?
I'm doing Cardiff Sharks for BBC Radio Wales, so not sure if I'm allowed to mention that on the Dragons podcast. But
that's fine.
After 30 odd years living in Cardiff,
We'll forgive you.
I'm not as opposed to them as I used to be when I was growing up on the terraces at Rodney Parade.
Brilliant. Nick, thank you so much for joining me on the pod. It's been a pleasure having your expertise this evening. Really do appreciate it.
Best wishes to Gavin as well, that he's back in action next week.
Yes, get well soon, Gav. Like I said, that's what the Dragons do to you. They've made him ill. He's lost his voice, and who can blame him? Who can blame him? It's been a tough season. We could all agree on that. So thank you, Nick, and thank you to Riverside Sports Bar for their continued support of this podcast. We'll be back next week. Hopefully, Gavin will be joining me. But until then, it's ta-ra for now. Ta-ra.
That was The Dragon's Lair in association with the Riverside Sports Bar Newport, an American-style bar with a proper Welsh feel.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.